Like most everyone else, I'm sickened by what happened with those elementary school kids and the teachers in Texas. Them being shot by someone for no apparent reason. And innocence it's hard to watch uh, innocence being harmed, and again with zero justification for it. I even feel that way too about speech when people are slandered for no justification or no solid reason at all. It's an ugly thing, and it hurts people. So I mean, loss of life as well as sometimes loss of dignity and people being ridiculed. It's all negative things, and part of the political argument ends up being that because such negative can come from a First and Second Amendment, that those things need to be tweaked, either taken out completely or altered to the point where harm can't happen. And I think it's obvious that harm can happen without firearms. Uh, just even thinking about the guy who plowed over people in the parade not too awful long ago. He killed quite a few people with his car. I understand the point people make. You can conceal a gun and you can kill a lot of people at once. I get that. And I think what keeps coming back in my mind is the fact that we have to weigh the cost versus benefit of having a First and Second Amendment. Is it worth innocent people being able to be harmed, whether it be through word or physically killed? Is it worth having that for what we say the First and Second Amendment are needed for? Which takes us to that concept of what is it needed for? What's its origin even? And if we think back to when this country was being formed as its own independent country, the people who lived here during that time were willing to put themselves and their families at risk to have independence from an authoritarian system, from a dictator. It meant enough to them that they were willing to sacrifice those things, because it wasn't like that the British or even allies of theirs would be here not harming civilians who weren't even engaged. So these people at the time knew their own families were at risk. That was not out of the question. So did they understand threat could come to innocent people? They did. And they were willing to risk it at that time. I don't think we as Americans understand what that sort of oppression was, what it looked like, or even what the countries, those people who ended up here, what those countries looked like. We just don't have a concept of it, because pretty much all the people living here today, especially people who were born here, don't have a concept of real oppression. Real oppression is going to bring about physical resistance. And we've seen it in some ways, but to the point where people would be willing to go ahead and just sacrifice everything they have, it tells you about a different type of culture and a different type of widespread oppression. And I guess what I'm trying to process through here is, if we think there's supposed to be freedom of speech and the right to bear arms, why is it that we think we need those things? We can look back in history and say why they needed it in the 1700s. Why is it important now? Human nature has pretty much stayed the same. Human nature, you can go across the globe and see that human nature has remained the same for thousands of years. Granted, we have increased in empathy in some parts of the world, and we have a lot more knowledge, but human nature has the potential to harm people. We know that. Without freedom of speech, you have no way to have a balanced culture. You have no way to have two sides of a story to weigh to find out what the consistent or sound conclusion is. Even though freedom of speech can harm people, even though guns can harm people, innocent people, they also can protect against authoritarian rule, dictator rule, a rule that can tell people what they can say, what they can believe, how their own personal culture or subculture should work, what you should aspire to, who you should like or dislike, and then past the point of that into, well, we can jail you for it. That's already happening, and I'm not going to discuss that here. You guys who look at stuff like that already know you can get jailed for it. And past that, you can get, at some point, you'll be to where you could be physically harmed for it. But your livelihood can be taken as the point. And I guess I'm thinking back, wondering, is that the type of thing that the people in the 1700s were willing to sacrifice themselves and their whole families even to obtain or to protect, which is livelihood, which is personal liberties and freedoms. The foundations here, the principles that this was built on, had to do with developing a place where individuals, your common people, could have their own cultures. You know, your government more so to be there to protect in larger issues, especially from external forces. But I don't know where you go with trying to have a discussion about this in current America unless you utilize history to say why America started the way it did, with a global culture that had very little empathy. This country stood out as a place that started to develop those liberties that you just didn't see across the globe. It took a while to happen. I've said that many times, but it started here. So you got to wonder, what can it look like? And it's hypothetical for a lot of us, I think, is what's causing the issue here, because we can sit here and say, well, it's not going to happen. You know, people wouldn't let that happen, but people would let that happen. Think about World War II. What was Hitler able to accomplish? And that wasn't all that long ago. I'm just saying, all powerful groups that are large, that have plenty of resources, money, and can make culture look the way they want it to look, what kind of power is that? What would people do with it? I guess I'm going back to the value of the Second Amendment, the value of freedom of speech. And I hate that this is in the backdrop of this tragedy that just happened in Texas. But those are the very things that have to be discussed when we talk about what we think our rights are as Americans. That's something to ponder on.